seem to indicate we got noise this time, which is good. All right. So the arrived at the Adam Haddock concert is an ordinal level metric. If we do decide to use this in correlation or regression, we're violating a little bit of the assumptions and requirements for a correlation. Correlation requires interval or better, interval or ratio. These ordinal metrics, I still think we can get some insight here. One of the first things I'd want to do with these variables, though, is get a look at what their shapes are. Shapes in terms of getting a histogram. So it's the frequency variables part, and then slash histogram. This is a 1 to 5 scale for the motivations. 1 is what and 5 is what?
1 is strongly agree, and then it goes lower to strongly disagree.
Okay. 1 is strongly agree. 5 is strongly disagree. And then for arrived, 1 is early and 4 is late, right? Late is like during the show?
Yeah.
All right. I mean, we're treating this ordinally, but at the very least, we have like ends of the spectrum. It's not like it has some odd shape. Okay.
Actually, I have a random question, if you don't mind going back to that other on the output.
The output?
Or sorry, the syntax. So do you not put, so it says you do Adam Hanna motivations 1, 2, 3, 4. Why don't you do arrived at Adam Hanna with all of its variables as well?
I don't know what you mean. Which?
Oh wait, never mind. Because all of those, actually, never mind. All of those, each motivation was, okay, never mind. Sorry. Isn't like Adam Hanna motivations 1 is strongly agree, whereas like to go, oh no, motivation 1 is
no,
I like Adam's music.
Yeah, the question, the variable is that SPSS calls motivations 1 is the last time you attended an Adam Haddock concert, how important was.
Yeah, okay, that makes sense.
I like his music.
And then each one has the strongly disagree scale. I think that's why I was confused. Whereas the other one doesn't have any other questions.
So we had 62 people who went to the show. This isn't a normal distribution by any stretch. You do have this 32 people. About half of your people have some agreement with I like his music. But then you've got about half of the people who are on the other end of the scale, even with the spike here of about, I don't know, 15 to 18% of people who strongly disagree with liking his music. Or this isn't agreement, this is importance. So for 16% of people, I like Adam music, not at all important. So there's a motivation for a chunk of his audience that has nothing to do with his music. Or at least the people who went to the show. We do have this question about I personally know Adam, which can be an interesting thing if we wanted to go back to the 12 males who have been at a show. Are those people who are willing to travel farther, are they willing to travel farther because they know who he is? So to me, I would think that's an interesting correlation. If you know Adam, are you willing to Does it travel to Adam Hansen? All right, so there's underscore one there. So what I did here was say, I want to look at the relationship between how far you're willing to travel and these different motivations.
Mhm.
So what's motivating people to travel further to the concert? The negative correlation actually means, oh, well, this is, so this negative correlation means if I like Adam's music, a low value, I'm willing to travel farther, high value. So a negative correlation here means things that are important increase the travel time. Because one means agree.
Mhm.
You tracking with me on this?
Mhm.
So the lower we are on any of these motivations, the more agreement we have. But in terms of how long are you willing to travel, a higher number means I care more or I'm willing to travel farther. Let me see if I can put this in Excel, make it a little easier to read. I'm going to pivot this out first. I'm going to drop the everything off of the visual except for the correlation magnitudes. A couple of them are not significant, but less concerned about that, more concerned about just understanding interpretation at this point, and then we can go back to seeing whether or not there's significant correlations. So I like Adam's music is negatively correlated with how far you're willing to travel. Negative correlations, again, mean I agree with I like Adam's music and I'm willing to travel further. This correlation here is negative, so I know Adam personally. If I agree with this, I'm also willing to travel farther. The correlation is weak, and it's also not significant.
That was for which one? Sorry. That was for, I personally know. So because it's negative though, it means that they are willing to travel further because they know Adam. If there's still no significance.
Right.
Okay.
What we're looking at here for a threshold for statistical significance, things over about 0.25 with this sample size. So those are all your significant correlations, the ones that are bolded. These are not significant, so I wouldn't really worry about those.
Okay.
I know the opening act musician, positive correlation means this is not important, willing to travel further. My friends were going, not important, I'm willing to travel further. But it may not be that like it's not important that my friends are going causes me to be willing to travel further. We're talking about how important these things are. So think about the people who are willing to travel further. We can look at their output here and right. Yeah. Something like this. I knew the opening act musician. A bunch of people know the opening act musician. Some people don't. There's a positive correlation here, which means that these people are willing to travel further than these people. A negative correlation means that these people are willing to travel further than these people. The lower you are on here, the further you are willing to travel. A lower number here means more agreement with the statum. I like Adam's music. So if I like Adam's music, I'm willing to travel further. This was a non-significant correlation. This one was a positive correlation, which means this isn't important. These people aren't willing to travel. Sorry, these people, we see positive correlation. These people aren't willing to travel as far. So I'm sort of going back and forth between willing to travel as far and not, because in the case of I like his music. We've got a chunk of people over here who like his music, right? Who like his music. And they're willing to travel. And I think those are the people who are driving the negative correlation, 0.35 or whatever it was. Those people say, I like his music, therefore I'm willing to travel. But then you've got a chunk of people here who say, I know the opening act.
And they're willing to travel as well.
No, it's the opposite. Now, this correlation is positive. So these people, they know the opening act, but they don't travel. Because that's the positive correlation. What's the interpretation here? What does this mean?
So you're only willing to travel if you like his music personally, but then if you only care about the opening act, you won't travel. That makes sense.
Yeah, I'm going down to see my boy Spencer play some music. Oh, where's he playing? Boston. I'm not going to Boston.
Yeah, but if you like Adam's music, you'll be willing to travel further.
Yeah.
So is this then? Okay, so this is a negative correlation. Okay, got it.
This is sort of when Jeff does research, I tend to keep my higher numbers as agreement and my lower numbers as disagreement, because sometimes interpreting the negative correlation does one more logic step in your brain that makes you like, wait, it's negative, so it's backwards. If I just knew the more you like his music, the further you're willing to travel, positive correlation, that seems to resonate. Oh, we just have to flip it a little bit. So then if you illustrate, you can do something like this and go, oh, I got it. We're still working with a pretty small base size in this case. I think it's, only 62 people. Yeah, generally 61, 62 people across these different know who Adam is. So that's not huge, but
So like, what could we like tell him based off of this information?
If this is, I mean, it's great. So did you go Friday?
No.
To the Met? Did you go
No, I
Friday?
didn't go.
Anybody go Friday?
No.
This is your team. This is your boy. You
I
don't
went
go
to
to
my
the show.
last
I know. I
couldn't
really
make
wanted to
this
go.
one.
I couldn't make this one.
Yeah. It was a long night. I mean, I got there a little after 9. I didn't know any of the opening acts, but I just didn't want to not get in. And then I sat in the back and drank vodka tonics until Adam came on. It's just sort of how it goes. Checking email on my phone like some 30-something who shouldn't be at a show for college kids. Be that as it may, it was a nice little ethnographic observation for me because I got to see sort of what happened. And I've been to those shows before where like the local opening act draws a certain crowd, and then when the headliner comes on, there's this big, oh my god, he's finally coming on. And then what happens to the crowd? If we were here to see the opening act and the opening act is done and we don't really know, or we're not really sucked into the headliner, we might dissipate a little bit because we came and we saw Spencer or Michaela or whoever else was on the opening act list. I'm just trying to remember names that were on the list. I only remember that there was somebody named Kayla because your name's Kayla.
Oh, sorry.
So
Yeah,
what's
okay.
yeah, that's you. Great job. So don't bring Spencer to Boston.
Mhm.
That's what the recommendation is. People will come see Spencer because he knows the opening act, and we're not willing to travel very far. We'll still come to the show to see the opening act if it's around the corner. But if you're going on the road and people aren't going to generally travel to see the opening act. It can be nice to have that, but one of the things that the opening act does is it gets people at 9 o'clock because they want to see their friends play 4 songs. They want to see a Jack Johnson cover, or I don't know, insert 2014 pop guitarist. I don't know, like I don't know your music now. What is it? Knee deep? Is that one? No, I don't know.
I don't know.
I'm just making stuff up at this point. So I mean that's
interesting.
Yeah, that is really interesting.
and to get that from 60 people, that's I think he probably knows that, but it's nice to be able to verify that. Yeah.
I think going off of that, can we try to analyze, I guess, the opposite of it? So people that are friends with the opening act, do they leave right after or do they stay?
Do you have questions about that?
Yeah, I have. Yeah, that was like going to the next one. I think that would be interesting then.
It's left AH concert.
Yeah, left AH. We put that with the other ones.
See, I'm just
the frequency things just kind of confuses me.
so when I run this, I could run it on its own, but as a shortcut, I just run it all together because I already know when I run frequencies, whatever variables I want in here, give me a histogram. It's already typed here, so I just add the variable, run this all again, and when I generate new output, it's going to give me these first 5. I already know what they look like, but it's just the shortcut for computation or whatever. So now look, we get those same things that we were just looking at. We saw those things, but those aren't
intertwine them. Yeah, it's just going to do it.
Yeah, ours were intertwined.
Yeah, ours was
so funny. It was like they tried to make a histogram, but it was just all these words on the page, like across and like vertical,
going like in all different directions. It was just like absolutely.
We're so bad.
Yeah.
You're learning.
No one wants to hire us for market research after this.
Are you kidding me? Like this is you learning. Like this is figuring out what works and what doesn't. If you, I don't know. Let's not have that conversation now. Let's have that conversation. Well, shoot, you're going to be gone Friday, so maybe no time. But now. So best describes when you left. We got to get the levels of this variable for left AH concert. Basically the same thing. That ordinal metric where 1 is early and 4 is late. And if we look at the correlation between left AH concert and which was the variable about did you know him? Was it 2?
Well, this was a little bit different. So when you left and if you were friends with the opening act.
But those are motivations, still the motivations, right? So
you just do all the motivations.
Yeah, I can, and I'm putting a whole bunch of things in here, but I'm really kind of only looking at one. There's other ways that you can specify the correlation command, but generally, since this is the variable, I want to know it's correlated with left Adam Hanna concert. I want to put that one in first, so I can just look down the first column.
Okay.
The whole matrix will still be there. I don't know that I need these other variables, but it doesn't hurt to throw them in. And then I run it. And now I can look down this first column. I'm going to do that same stuff. Double click it, pivot the trays, take statistics to a layer, change the layer to only the correlation. Actually, let's do that yet. What do you need?
on that.
So I got this. Is this the thing?
Oh no, just a
I
computer
have it.
charger. I got it. Thanks.
I like my phone.
Yeah, it looks like 0.25 is probably going to be our cutoff. So I'm looking right here at this correlation, and I see the correlation value is 0.27. The p-value is just under 0.5. And that indicates to me that with this base size, correlations about 2.5 are significant. Things less than that are probably going to be accept the null. Correlations greater than that, I will reject the null. This is just me getting a quick sense of, given this base size, a base size of about 60, which magnitudes of correlation are going to be significant.
You said negative.
Negative or positive doesn't matter. We can interpret the negative or positive.
And how do you decide that that's what? I'm just confused. How do you decide on that number from this?
I look at this cell right here. There's a correlation of 0.27.
Of I like Adam's hand.
I don't care what the variables that are correlated are.
Okay.
I'm just looking at this magnitude and the associated p-value, because I know the thing that determines the p-value is the magnitude of the correlation.
Right.
Smaller correlation, accept the null. Smaller correlation, accept the null. Larger correlation, reject the null. So it's right around here, right around 0.25. Things that have a correlation value greater than 0.25 will probably be statistically significant.
Okay.
If the correlation is less than 0.25, it's a non-significant correlation. That way I can just only look at the correlation magnitudes. It reduces the complexity of the information.
So a greater than is not significant, you said.
No,
Sorry, I
It's
just jumped.
correlated.
So less than 0.25 is not significant,
Correct.
and greater than
Greater.
0.25 is significant.
In this context,
Right.
with this base size of 60 some people, if the base size were 60,000 people,
Mhm.
every correlation would be significant on the
Right.
basis of the basis of the base size. If we had 10 people in our sample, we would need correlations on the order of 0.75
Yeah.
to be statistically
makes sense.
significant. But given how much evidence we have, 62 observations, I'm only really going to be focusing on correlations that are so 0.238. 0.238 has a p-value of 0.062. It's right on the cusp.
Yeah.
That's a 0.24, marginally significant. 0.29, statistically significant. That just gives me a quick rule of thumb so that I know which correlations I can pay attention to and which ones I can ignore. I can, 0.2 is something that we ignore. All of these we ignore. Those two we ignore. That we ignore. That we ignore. That one is 0.328, marginally significant, and that one is significant.
Interesting.
So this is the last time. When did you leave? A lower number means early, a bigger number means later. The two things that are correlated with when you left, I like Adam's music, and I know the opening act musician. Anybody see the story that we're painting here?
And that's
And they're in opposite directions. The negative correlation is getting the same thing that we saw here. I like his music. I stick around because that is so these people like his music, and they're on the low side. They're the ones and twos on the important. And because it's negatively correlated, the more important it is, the lower this number, the higher the exit time is. When R is negative, that means the more important, the longer you stay, right? On the other hand, we see a positive correlation here, we have this same I know the opening act distribution. Something like this. I know the opening act. I don't know the opening act. If I know the opening act, this is positively correlated, which means I know the opening act, small number. I leave early, small number. Positive correlation means it's in the same direction. If you know the opening act, you leave earlier. The effect isn't strong on the order of 0.3. It's a weak to moderate correlation, but it's statistically significant on the basis of 60 people. And I mean, I think that's a thing that we know, but we know from experience, but we validated our experience statistically.
Right. So could we say for like, since we now know that we know that so we now know that if someone knows the opening act, they're more likely to leave earlier. Could we say as a suggestion to him, like maybe like incorporate some of the openers in some of your songs at the end?
There you
something-
go.
Okay.
Yeah, I loved that. So back in, to date myself a little bit, 1999 was the first time I heard of the band OAR. You guys ever heard of that band?
Mhm.
And they used to play with one of my top five, this band called Virginia Coalition. And they would come out during right before the first encore or something. All right, we're going to bring John and JP. We're going to bring the guys from Vaco back out. Hey, how you doing, guys? And then there'd be like the five guys from Vaco, the five guys from OAR. There'd be congas, kungas, saxophones. There'd be just this whole mess, and they jam. And everybody who wanted to see Vaco or OAR, we were all there just having like a blast.
Mhm.
So we're gonna bring Spencer back out. Spencer, and you know why we're gonna stick around? I know he likes to invite. He invites the crowd up. There was a point where he brought up like basically half the audience, but it was it happens. But
Never one of us though.
but if we look for that opportunity, it's you want those people to stick around. Then he gets to spread the word to his friends who know the opening act and say, don't leave right away, because I'm going back on it when we do the first. We're gonna play "Shook Me All Night Long" together or something. Yeah. You want to stick around to see your friend play with the headliner.
Yeah, it's very cool.
That is very cool. Mm-hmm. You're right. Like, this is neat. Like, this is experiences I know and I've had and I've never seen validated statistically. That's friggin' great. All right, what else?
Should we go through our hypotheses? Like,
that's
should we go back up to those?
I think we should probably go back.
Yeah.
Just to make sure.
So social dynamics first. How important are the following elements to you when attending a concert versus your age? And our thing about age, we could even do education with that, but we could just do it with education.
Age or education yesterday that was all the same. I can't remember.
I think it was education because we could never figure out how to do age because they're all inputted numbers.
What's your
we're doing like students.
What's your age variable?
It's we're doing education instead because we did students versus non-students in education.
What's your age variable? I want to get that first.
Okay. It should just be age.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. Your education variable?
Education.
Mm-hmm.
Student versus non-student?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Now, is that something you created, or it must have been in Qualtrics, because I don't know that you put value labels in here. Is that correct?
I put the value labels in yesterday.
Oh, where did you compute, was this, help me understand, was this actually the question as it was asked in your study?
No, I don't think so.
How did you ask education in your study?
We had it as
it was the one where you can input if you go to a different college. I go here.
So it's like currently a Providence College student.
Yeah, I need the variable name. Whenever I say what is the thing, I want the variable name.
Oh, sorry. Oh no, it is education. It is
it is what is your education level?
Yeah.
That was the question.
But all I have is student versus non-student.
Because we got rid of the students that are attending college.
Because we only had like 10 responses. So we thought that was not going to be helpful to us at all.
age, education, student, non-student. So 102 students, 43 non-students.
Mm.
So I'm trying to be clear as to what this data is, and I keep asking this question, which is this the data as it was extracted from Qualtrics, or did you change this variable? Did you change this data? Because if
Yeah.
this is a text input, there's nothing in that variable.
Yeah, I
We
think
changed it.
yeah, because what we had was it went one was currently a PC student, two was attending a college other than Providence, and then three was not
Yeah.
attending. And based on what you said, to get rid of the people that weren't Providence College students that are in college. So then we kept PC student as
Yeah.
number one, and then we just made
Future
Non-students,
future
too.
reference, make that a new variable. Don't overwrite a variable like that.
okay.
Because I want to know what I can do, what was done. And I think when I look at this, that you asked the question for education, what is your education level, student or non-student?
Okay.
And that's a weird response set for that question.
Okay.
Okay.
But student is defined as any student, students at PC. Did we eliminate non-PC
We just
students?
did
Yeah.
PC student.
So this is not student, this is PC student. And this is not non-student, this is non-student or non-PC student.
It's just
No,
non-student.
it's just
We got rid of all the
non-student.
non-PC student responses.
So anybody who is a non-PC student is just gone?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
There was
We
only
didn't
like
think it was
5
gonna
people.
help us.
Yeah.
Did you eliminate them from your SAV, from your data?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. From everything.
Okay,
They're gone.
they're gone.
Yep.
So education is one is PC student, two is non-student, non-PC students were removed. Analytically, that's something you have to document.
Okay.
Otherwise, it's sort of suspect, like, wait a minute, everybody in your sample is either a PC student or not a student. You got no one from Rick. You got no one from J-Dub, Shaywu. Well, we did, but we got rid of them. Why didn't you tell me that?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's diligence.
Yeah, we'll make sure we talk about that.
Yeah. All right. So education is really PC student or not PC student. All right, I'm with you on there. So now what's the thing that we're looking at with respect to?
So we tried to do this yesterday. So how important the following elements? So like, basically what we're trying to look at is, do people that are students care more about being with friends versus non-students care more about listening to familiar and new music?
That's a couple different things. The first thing we're going to do is the same thing we did before, which is we're going to compare rather than males to females. We're going to compare PC students to not PC students on. And I think we may have done that a little bit, but this is how many people? Like 100 and some?
Yeah.
Yeah. I think we have about, like,
And then
40
this is something like
non-students.
40.
Yeah.
Okay. Logical symbol for not, but I'll just put non-PC. All right. So sample sizes, somewhere around 100, somewhere around 40. And then we have a number of different variables that we're going to use independent samples t-test in order to get an understanding of what we're doing.
Mhm.
What variables do you want to compare? Do you want to still use these Adam Hanna motivations? Do you want to look at all motivations? What dependent variables? Because these are your independent variables. You're
These are
trying
the
to see if these
elements.
things predict anything else there.
Yeah, I think just the elements. How important are the following elements?
Okay. So rather than use gender, we'll use your education variable.
Are you doing a independent t-test?
Mm-hmm. We have two independent samples, these people versus those people, and they don't overlap. Define the groups as 1 and 2. Okay.
Mhm.
And the outcome dependent test variables, how important are these elements to you?
It should be
Elements and features.
important.
I think we're just doing elements, not features.
Yeah.
Well, the thing about software is you can do them all at once.
Okay, we can just do both.
Oh man, I wish I could get rid of that stupid test for, it just makes it complicated. So here we are back again, and we have all of these different variables. So we've got things like familiar music, new music, support the band or musician, and so on. The average for students on familiar music is about a 1.5. For non-PC students is about a 1.6. These dependent variables, it's important to know how they're measured, whether a big number or small number means what it does. But for all of these important elements or important features, 1 is important, 5 is not important. So for all of these things, the lower number means which? More or less important?
More.
Good. Lower number is more important. So the average for this group is 1.5. The average for this group is 1.6. For hear familiar music, who is it more important for?
PC.
PC, exactly. Question.
Yeah, I think that's what was throwing us off maybe yesterday, is
So,
especially like when I was trying to look at them to try to make like some kind of like a graph or something. For the ones that disagreed, it was, or I forget exactly how to describe it, but it's like the opposite with means, right?
Mhm.
I think we were looking at the p-value.
Yep, I'm doing that next.
Okay,
Doing that
so can we
next.
look at both?
So all these things are related. So this difference is not very big.
Yeah.
The mean difference we can get from the t-test. The mean difference between these two groups, 0.097, which is approximately 0.1. We see that. The difference between those 1.5 and 1.6 is 0.1. So the mean difference, or the difference between the means, is 0.1.
Yeah.
We use that mean difference to get a t-value. The t-value here for this particular difference is negative 0.8. It doesn't really matter. That number is less than that number. So the mean difference is negative. So the t-value is negative. If I had put non-PC, PC, everything else would be positive, but that doesn't influence the outcome. It just means the order we selected the groups was non-PC than PC. So if I say negative 0.8 or for the t-value, or negative 0.1 for the mean difference, whatever. But then p-value is what we're worried about here. And the p-value for this particular difference is 0.43. Is this difference significant? Yes or no, and why?
No.
Why?
Because, wait, you said 0.43 is the p-value? Because it's less than it's greater than 0.05.
Therefore,
It's not significant.
very good. So this difference determines this t-value. The t-value determines the p-value. The t-value is your test statistic. The p-value is your evaluation of the t-value. If this number gets big, the t-value gets big because the mean difference is big. And if the mean difference is big, it probably means this is a real difference. If the mean difference is big, the t-value gets big and the p-value gets small. We look at the second difference here, which is on new music. The average for students is a 2.7. The average for non-students is 3.1. What's the mean difference here? Negative 0.4. 2.7 minus 3.1, negative 0.4. That's a bigger difference than the previous item.
Yeah.
So the t-value should probably increase as well. The difference between these two things affects the t-value. The t-value for new music, this is the new music row, the t-value here is negative 2.2. And the p-value associated here is 0.03. Is the difference between PC students and non-PC students of 0.4 a meaningful, or sorry, a statistically significant difference? Yes or no, and why?
Yeah.
Because
The p-value
is
less than 0.05.
very good. So the smaller the p-value, a small p-value results from a larger difference. A larger difference is indicated by your t-value. And this gives us, just like in the previous example, we sort of had, given these magnitudes and this base size and given all this information, a correlation of 0.25 is significant. For us, we see that a difference of about 0.4 is where we start to see the difference being statistically significant. And remember, lower number is more important. So for PC students, new music is more important for PC students than it is for non-PC students. And we may have had this discussion the last time we looked at this data, but I think that was just me and you, and Michaela was here for a while. Is that right? No, Justine was here for a while. My challenge here with this particular item, and this is no study's perfect. You don't think about these things until you look at it. What do we mean by new? Is new like it's the 105.9 new music hits of the 2010 for the Generation Y, or is new music like here's a new cut off my new album? I hope you all like it. Like, what do we mean by?
So that would be one of our limitations.
Thank you. Yeah. So does new mean modern? Does new mean something I haven't heard before? If you execute the study again or go down the line further in the rabbit hole, that's probably a distinction worth making.
That makes sense.
But you don't realize that's a distinction worth making until you ask the question, find the difference, and go, oh, shoot, how do I interpret that?
Right.
So for this then, non-PC students like new music more than PC students.
Nope. Lower number
lower
means
number.
more important.
Okay, yes.
That's why we put this here. That's why I always do that. Like always, this is for that exact reason. I've been burned by. I don't think I've been burned. I think I'm a little too retentive to let that happen. Although vital findings, and then otherwise, if you want, there's a couple ways you can do this now. Is that you just know all I'm doing is going to the t-test and running down this column to look where is the p-value less than 0.05. And when I get here, I stop because I don't care about this. I don't care about this. I don't care about this. Those p-values are greater than 0.05. Not a significant difference between PC and non-PC students, like about those things. But then we stop here at this variable, which is to be with friends. So when we talk about friends, we see a significant difference. The average for our friends item, 1.7 for the PC students, 2.1 for the 2.1 for the non-PC students. Again, it's about the same magnitude of difference, 0.4. I'm going to expect a probably similar t-value here, t-value of 2.4. A very similar t-value. Negative again. The p-value here is 0.02. I stopped there because it was a statistically significant difference, less than 0.05. The t-value is big, gives me a small p-value, which means this is a significant difference. Now it's time to interpret. When it comes to be with friends, who is it more important for? PC. The lower number means that it's more important to PC students than to our I know that technically we keep saying non-PC students, but I think it's better that we come up with a nicer but still accurate description for these people. Part of that may be we look at their demographics and see who they are. If their age group is like mean of 35 or mean of 50, because when we look at the age distribution, I don't know if you remember looking at the age distribution, but from what I saw, age sort of went like a big spike here around the 20s, and then it sort of went like that somewhere around 50. So like it may be that these are the PC students and these are the nons, so we can sort of call these the, I don't know, just call them the adults, like and that's what we do. Like we're trying to simplify this so we can get an understanding.
That makes sense.
That's the trade-off between, like, when you're a researcher, you have to be super like, nope, those are non-PC students. Do they include non-PC students? Because they're not. No. Now we're storytellers. It's the kids versus the adults. Help your client understand, and that's the way it is. So although I lose the specificity in language, I'm now going to start describing this group as the adults. The adults don't care as much about being with friends.
So are we supposed to just, like, as we are running through that, do we just look at the p-value first and then look at everything else after? Okay, And then do we have to comment on like all of them or just the p-value?
So analytically, you run all these t-tests and said we looked at all of our features and elements, and we found 3 or 4 significant differences between these two groups. The rest of them, we found no evidence to reject the null.
Okay.
So then you're done. Like you don't, if you didn't find a significant difference, you don't need to report 1.6 versus 1.5, non-significant. Well, 1.9 versus 2.0, non-significant. Just say most of them were non-significant. We're now going to report the significant findings. Hearing new music, being with friends. There's another one here. 2 more here. So seating and dance floor.
Yeah, are there anything that like adults value more than students in this?
And that's what we're after. So the 2 more that I'm going to look at are seating and dance floor. And Susan, why am I looking at seating and dance floor?
Because the adults tended to favor the.
Nope. P-value.
Yeah.
That's why I'm going to those. There's a whole list of other things here that I'm just straight up ignoring. I'm just running down this p-value column because it tells me where there's a significant difference.
Remember this from what we did.
Good. Oh yeah. And they do end up being, to Caroline's point, they're the ones that are significant, or I think are higher for adults. At least they are for seating. I can tell because the t value is positive. So let me just go backwards here. Seating has a p-value which is less than 0.01. I'm reporting them as less than 0.01 because while it says 0.000, it's not actually all zeros like that. This triple zeros here is 0.000249, less than 0.01. So these are 2 that we're concerned about. The t-value here is 2.9, and the t-value here is negative 3.8, and that's for seating and dance floor. Seating, the PC students had a 2.5, the adults had a 1.9 because we're old and we like to sit. On the other hand, 2.8 for the kids. 3.6 for the adults for the dance floor because you like to shake it. Lower number means more important. Seating is more important for adults. Dance floor is more important for kids.
Oh, the dance
I would
floor.
definitely.
Wait, so lower number is more important for the mean or for the t-value?
Mean.
Okay.
Just so yeah, a bigger t-value means there's a difference.
Okay.
But when I interpret the means for this particular set of questions, the way these characteristics and features or elements and features, the way these things are coded, the lower value means more important.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
You could have put 5 is extremely important, 1 is unimportant, but that's not the way you coded. You have yours as 1 is extremely important, 5. So it doesn't matter. They're just numbers that anchor the scale. Given the way these are coded, we're looking at these lower means as being more important.
Cool. Very interesting. Okay, that definitely helps with that one. The next one is our cost, and our problem with that was, I know Susan said when she met with you that you should make like a range for them to code it.
Because we have like the select, like we say that students aren't willing to pay more than $10.
Yeah, that's
So-
not a thing. We saw that. though,
Yeah,
right?
that was not
Yeah.
a thing at all. So that we kind of messed up
'cause we
there.
put
But
that in the
like,
wrong section. So that,
But is there a way to
everyone can
say-
see that.
Yeah. Oh yeah, because
It
this one was
wasn't
the
related
one.
to Adam Hannah's
Yeah.
image to any concert you wanted to.
like we
Right.
wanted to know, but I just don't know why we.
Yeah, I don't know a 10 either. Is there a way to see like students versus non-students who's willing to pay more?
Mhm.
Do we have to recode that all the numbers into like the because the ratio is not even the ratio, the range thing is throwing me off because it's like
There's no range. You just have what's the most you would pay to go see a show.
Well, the thing is,
It
we
was
just
you
have
type it in.
inputs, so
Yeah.
we don't really know if SPSS will analyze.
What do you
That's why we
mean?
thought we
What's the question? What's the variable?
let me look.
Is it most money to pay?
Yeah.
And why are you talking about intervals? Most money to pay is a ratio level metric. People just input numbers.
Yeah.
I can say, give me descriptive statistics for that. for most money to pay. The minimum was 0, the maximum was 500, the average is 150, and the standard deviation is 100. Like, people input numbers there.
Okay.
That's a ratio level dependent variable. We could do the exact same thing we did here.
True.
I'm going to go back to that.
Yeah.
Here, we've got all these things. Guess what? I'm just going to add most money to pay?
Mm-hmm.
Easier for me just to add a variable to that and ignore all this stuff here. And then I come back, hey, those numbers look familiar, 0.028, and then there's those 0.4, and then there's those zeros for dance floor. And down here, bless you, what would be the most you'd be willing to pay for a concert in dollars? Marginal significance here, or some evidence to reject the null. Our p-value is 0.055. It is not less than 0.05, but it's on the cusp. So we call that marginal significance, or directionally significant. If you had a directional hypothesis, you would reject the null. You have a two-tailed non-directional hypothesis, so you accept the null at the 0.05 level. That's just got something to do with, like, I don't know, 217. Just has to do with the probability. He didn't make a directional hypothesis. I'm not going to, I mean, other than the fact, actually, so I'm gonna throw us back. Let me document some things real quick, and then I'm gonna story tell for just a second. 9, 4, and the means for these two groups. The mean for the student group is about 140, and the mean for the adult group is 175. Now, this is not a lower means importance. These are dollar values. This is a table of critical values. All of these t-values are test statistics. When we talk about accepting or rejecting the null, what we're doing is comparing this test statistic to a critical value that comes from this table. The critical values are based on a couple of different things. One of them is the number of tails in your hypothesis. A non-directional hypothesis, so whenever this says sig two-tailed, we're talking about two tails. The other thing that we need to do is select the level of significance called alpha, and that's 0.05 here. That's the industry standard. That's why I keep saying above 0.05 or below 0.05. But depending on your industry, depending on the amount of evidence you have, you can change that alpha level. So our critical value is the thing that we're going to compare our test statistic to. I'm not sure how much of this may have resonated comes from hypothesis testing in 217, but that's ultimately what the test is go or no go. We decide on a rule, we get a critical value, we calculate a test statistic, and we compare. The row that we select here is based on effectively sample size. In this context, it's called degrees of freedom, and that's why we have a degrees of freedom column right here. Degrees of freedom is associated with sample size. Our sample size was about 146. This is a little less than that because you've got independent samples and you always have to subtract one anyway. So our degrees of freedom for this particular hypothesis test is generally around 143 or 142. It's going to be somewhere between those two. So our critical value for a two-tailed 0.05 significance test is going to be somewhere around 1.6. Or sorry, no, I went to the wrong column. Is somewhere around 1.98. That's the important part. So for us, two-tailed test, 0.05 significance level, our critical value is around 1.9 and change. The test statistic we got is around 1.9 and change. These numbers are very close to these numbers, so our p-value is right around 0.05. If we set a marginal significance, if we go with 0.10, we get a lower critical value. Our test is bigger than our critical value, and we reject the null. We say there's a difference. Or if we say we have a directional hypothesis, a one-tailed hypothesis at the 0.05 significance level, that's the same as a two-tailed test at the 0.10 significance level. So if you were making the hypothesis that, directionally speaking, students would be willing to pay less than adults, that's a directional hypothesis. It has one tail. At the 0.05 significance level, your critical value is around 1.65, and 1.94 is greater than 1.65. So you reject the null, and you say this is a significant difference. This is one of those cases where if you have a non-directional hypothesis, this is p greater than 0.05. If you have a directional hypothesis, p is less than 0.05, which gives you a different decision. This is not different. In this case, it is different. And you're tracking with me on this.
Yeah.
Gosh, I wish I knew how to turn this number into a directional, but there's no,
So are you saying here from where you found that PC students would pay around 140 for the mean, and then non-PC students are 175? Okay, and that's just from, kind of see where you found that?
It was the same test that we've been doing for those other dependent variables, but as the dependent variable here, it's how much would you be willing to pay for entry into a concert.
Okay.
Same
cool.
test, different dependent variable.
Okay, cool.
So if we're trying to analyze the, like, how much you're willing to pay, we have to go through this step.
Yeah, let's say directional t-test calculator. No. No, I just want T it's not either. Oh. 142. There you go. Yeah, so it is just half of that. Of course. Silly Jeff. So T distribution right tail, given a T value of 1.94 and 142 degrees of freedom. Sorry, 143 degrees of freedom. Our p-value is 0.027. All of these are two-tailed p-values. They're non-directional hypotheses. They're exploratory. Is there any difference between PC and non-PC students? So is this question. But if you change your research hypothesis, which for all of these exploratory, aka default SPSS t-test, it's always the two-tailed, such that you're saying the null is the mean from group 1 is the same as the mean from group 2. The research hypothesis is that they're different. Like, that's the default. But if you gave me a directional hypothesis, then your null and your research look a little different. Your research is that group 1, in this case, the students, are going to pay less than group 2, in this case, the adults. The null is everything else, and convention or otherwise looks like that. When you do it this way, your p-value equals 0.055. When you do it this way, using the Excel T inverse, you should probably do like left tail, but I'm going to use RT because it doesn't matter, with a t-value of 1.94 and 143 degrees of freedom, rather than doing this calculation in SPSS, you can just run this value in Excel real quick. T inverse is how you calculate the p-value given the t. So all of these examples we were looking at here, I said the difference determines the t determines the p. The bigger the t value, the smaller the p value. The big t value results from a big difference. A big difference, big T, small p. Small difference, small t, big P. Small difference, accept the null, they're not different. Big difference, reject the null, they are different. In this case, if we change our hypothesis from exploratory, which is non-directional, to confirmatory, which is directional, in other words, I believe students are not willing to pay as much as adults, or adults are willing to pay more than students. You've now got a more than, you now have a directional, and you're under the guise of a one-tailed hypothesis. Your p-value gets cut in half, and now you can say this is less than 0.05. We have evidence to reject the null and say students are willing to pay less than adults. Okay. Now this is on the basis of your single question. So in terms of how we relate your metric, your variable, your construct, that question that you've asked, you're saying what's the most you're willing to pay is your best single item proxy or approximation for how much people are willing to pay. You ask them what's the most you're willing to pay. You didn't say what's the most, what's the least, what artist, what venue, what. You didn't dig down. You said, all right, if we had one chance, one shot, Mom Spaghetti, we get one question to figure out what is it, what question can we ask people to figure out how much they're willing to pay. We know you're willing to pay more to see Beyonce than you are to see Adam. You know you're willing to say you more to see your favorite artist than someone that your friends just want you to go see. We know. We don't know that from the data. We sort of know that from personal experience. But for us, we say if we've got one question, we're just going to say, what's the most you're willing to pay? And then we know adults are willing to pay more than students. And we've confirmed that here.
So since our hypothesis is that students are not willing to pay more than $10, and adults are, can we like change that hypothesis to make it more?
No, don't change your hypotheses. Your hypothesis is not supported, but you continue further on.
Okay, and just say that, like, in general, like, students are willing to pay less.
Yeah, so you're on the right track. If we want to step through this logically, the first thing is do your hypothesis test. We believed before we started collecting data that students were willing to pay more than $10. Boy, were we wrong.
Yeah.
That was a dramatic finding to us, so we decided to explore further to figure out, well, if they are willing to pay more than 10, let's at least compare them to adults to see if now we think that maybe adults are just willing to pay more than kids. Let's at least see if we can find some evidence for that.
Okay.
So we tested the hypothesis that adults are willing to pay more than students, and we confirmed that hypothesis. P-value of less than 0.05. The average for the most students are willing to pay is 140. The average for the most adults are willing to pay is 175. The t-value is 1.94. The p-value associated with the directional hypothesis is 0.027.
Okay. So do we have to explain like how we did this? Like going through.
What? Give me
don't
the
have to
example
go-
for your explanation.
Like I'm gonna get really confused, but
Mm-hmm.
we used the one tail t-test to
Go on.
see if students are willing to pay less than adults, and since the p-value is in between 0.05 and 0.1, we found that the confidence level is 1 point.
You were there, but let's stop like 8 words before confidence level. It goes like this. We used SPSS to do an independent samples t-test. By default, SPSS does a two-tailed test. But that's a non-directional test. For us, we had a directional hypothesis. A directional hypothesis has a different critical value, which gives us a different, not a different, not different. I mean, it does give you a different critical value, but when we're talking about P's, we don't care about critical values. They do sort of tell you the same thing, but it's not exactly the same. But SPSS gives you the two-tailed p-value, which is appropriate for exploratory or non-directional hypotheses. We had a directional hypothesis. So we used this function in Excel, the t inverse function, with a t-value of 1.94 is produced by SPSS.
That's a t inverse function.
Yeah.
So that's a one-tailed t-test.
Exactly. RT stands for right tail.
Okay.
Like, technically speaking, but not like, I don't really give a shit about that. Like, this is, again, we could have put this in either order, students versus non-students. The negative and positive just relates to which group we put in first. So I ignore the positive or negative on the T. It's bad juju, but like, it doesn't really matter. Like, not bad juju, it's just bad. Not bad. Like, no one cares. It's just the magnitude of the T value. That's all we really care about.
Mm-hmm.
Like this wouldn't, the right tail test wouldn't make sense if I put a negative t value in there. It would give me a p value that didn't make sense. That's like saying, I wanted to test whether students are willing to pay more than adults. And I got a p value of 0.9. Like a massive p value because I was really wrong and had a really bad hypothesis. No, like you come in here and I think there's probably like, yeah, you can't even do a left tail. Oh, you can. Negative 1.94 and 143 degrees of freedom. That gets you the same value as that, but you assume you use this function, which tells you, like, for us, t distribution is normal. T value at the mean is 0, just like a z value at the mean is 0, or whatever the mean here is, which I think was like $150. Our test statistic over here, actually, this is the mean difference, which is 0. We found a mean difference between these two groups of about $35. We calculated a t value of 1.94, which means that this area is like 0.027. The closer the difference is to 0, the smaller the t value and the less evidence we have that the difference is real. The bigger the difference is, the further it is from 0, the larger the t value and the more information we have that the difference is real. The rest of this area is, I mean, this is like, all of this is 100%. AKA this. You guys ever use e-tables? I don't know. It's the probability and statistics behind all of this stuff is really where I'm not trying to go too hard, but that's what I mean by RT or right tail. That little colored spot, this 0.027, that's the right tail. So it's giving me, when I say the t-value of 1.94 on the right-hand side with 143 degrees of freedom leaves me about 3% in the tail. A 3% chance that this difference isn't actually statistically significant. So by default, SPSS gives us a two-tailed test, but we had a directional hypothesis. So we took our t-value and our degrees of freedom that SPSS provided for us. We put it into this function in Excel, and it generated a p-value, which is effectively half of 0.055, because we went from a two-tailed test to a one-tailed test. That's how that stuff works. But now you've calculated a p-value. You see that for the directional hypothesis, it's less than 0.05, and you have evidence to support the notion that students or that adults are willing to pay more than students.
Okay, cool. So I guess the next question is, even though we know that our convenience one, I think we had like 2 people that were not students that have been to an Adam Panda concert, should we still try to do it on SPSS just so we can say, or like, do we just not ignore, but should we just like ignore the hypothesis and just say like, we realize
Don't
that
ignore
we
the
didn't-
hypothesis. What are you asking about?
Like, should we put it in SPSS still and just like see what the results come up?
I'm not sure what you're asking. Tell me again.
So like, what we were going to analyze was how long are you willing to travel for an Adam Hanna concert versus your
Gotcha.
education. But since
And we did that, right?
We did
Um,
that with males and females.
yeah, we did that.
All right. So let's just add that here, which was how far willing to travel.
Yeah.
What variable was that? Travel to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm just doing the same thing. Like I'm just piling another variable in the PC versus adults.
Yeah.
And then run it again. And we're going to see, again, this whole thing of, hey, familiar, use it, scroll to the bottom here. We see that difference of, I thought we did it by gender. I thought these were our gender numbers. Oh,
Yeah, we did do gender.
we can't. Oh, right. Okay.
Yeah. So
Same,
should we just
same
do
limitation.
it just to show?
Mm,
Like, should we have it? Yeah, there's like nothing to show, but just
No.
like, so we just say, yeah.
no, I report this by saying you don't have enough adults
Okay.
in your sample to execute this t-test.
Okay.
And then it becomes, yeah. So you can't, if that's what you're trying to do, you're trying to compare PC students to adults and how far they're willing to travel to go see Adam
Yeah.
play.
And
Yeah, you've got a
Gotcha,
weird
that
confound here, and it's a selection bias. I ran into this a bunch of years ago when I was doing work for a company that rhymes with Schmapplebee's. They wanted to do a restaurant evaluation, and spoilers, they didn't actually want to evaluate the restaurant. They wanted me to tell them that they were doing great so they could tell their shareholders that they had research that said they were doing great so that the shareholders would be happy. It was some nonsense that I didn't get until the end and was unhappy about when I got there, because I'm trying to do this rigorously. I'm like, I want to figure out what's going to work and what's not, and we just get pushed back the whole way until we get to the end. And it's like, why didn't you tell me that you were trying to do some unethical research? Because then I would have told you to go away. And then somebody else would be like, Jeff, calm down. Just tell them what they want. They want to pay you and you want a job, right? And I was like, yeah. Regardless, what you have, like, if you're trying to figure out whether or not people like your food at your restaurant, if you're handing out cards to the people who are leaving your restaurant or your dining experience, what is one thing that everybody who fills out that card has in common?
They all dined at your restaurant.
And why did they dine before they dined at your restaurant? They had to do something. It starts with C and rhymes with booze.
Choose.
They had to choose your restaurant. They had a number of different, a lot of rhyming today. But Liz is tracking. I like it. Before all of that, like, they had to choose Applebee's and say, or they had to choose your restaurant among all of the other choices, which means they came in with some sort of preference already.
Right.
How do you say how critical are you of these things if I'm only asking people who? So when it comes to Adam, like how far are you willing to travel for Adam? Well, if you're an adult and you know Adam, I mean, that's doing a similar thing, which is, oh, well, I'm his pops. I'm gonna travel an hour to go see him play. Like, oh, so hey, Adam, guess what? Adults are willing to travel real far to see you.
Yeah.
The adults who have heard of you, who know who you are, maybe those people. You're average schmo. You're 55-year-old. I don't know, as it were, but that's a limitation, and it's just a thing that you report. So you can't compare students versus adults on this metric, and even if you could, you'd be in a danger of a selection bias here. People who self-selected into the survey.
Right.
Cool.
So should we talk about then the gender difference? But the gender difference wasn't even that much because the males were only like 12 people.
I don't know. We could see if there is, and so if you only have 12 people, I would suggest like maybe 2 or 3 things. I'm not sure how many. Let me tell you how many when I get to the end. One is that with a small sample, you aren't likely to be rejecting the null anyway. A small sample is not going to give you a big p-value. Or sorry, a small sample is going to give you a big p-value regardless. But if you do see differences with a small sample, it may be that those differences are in fact meaningful. Because if you do get a significant p-value with a small sample, the only way that can happen is because the difference is big. Remember, a big difference means a big T, small p. Big difference, small p. Big difference, reject the null. Big difference, effect is real. So if you have a small sample and you see the effect is real, you're like, wow, that must be a strong effect. The problem is less with the statistics at that point and more with the sample. Who are these 12 people?
Right.
They're people who know Adam. So we're confounding what we believe to be a gender effect with the fact that, oh, I personally know him. And if you have a variable that says, do I personally know him or how familiar you are with this dude, you can control for that potential confound, or at least say, we think this difference is not in fact due to gender. So hypothetically, we see a difference between males and females on this variable. But we think that this difference may not actually be due to gender, so we looked at the 12 males and found out that 10 of the 12 males knew this dude. So we could compare the people who know this dude versus the people who don't know this dude. And if we see the same effect, we're like, oh, we're not really sure whether it's a gender effect or a know this dude effect.
How would you like look into with those 12 guys that answered who knows Adam versus who does not?
Do you have a question that asks that?
We don't.
We could make a question. We could say like,
I mean, at this point, your survey's done. Like we can't.
Yeah.
oh, I meant like, okay, yeah, no. I meant
Because
like,
we only have the question of like, have you been to Adam Hannah concerts? So it
Right.
doesn't tell us anything about how they know. him.
yeah, like could we
We
say,
know the opening act. We don't know if we know Adam.
right?
Oh, true, we do know that.
But what if like,
Right? So no study is
Yeah.
pertinent.
Didn't we say that?
I personally know Adam was one of the things.
Yeah, I
Can we do
personally,
that?
yeah, I personally know
The-
Adam.
I
was one of
personally
our
know
things.
Adam was part
Oh.
of like our
Like, why did you?
Yeah, your motivation.
So you do have a question like that.
yeah,
Um,
motivations to attend. I think it was like
Oh yeah, I remember that.
Where is it? Is it still? Tell me it's still in here.
it should be called AH motivations. Yeah.
I'm just trying to figure out which variable it is. I knew the opening act.
I personally know that. Oh, right.
Yeah.
Is that 1 or 2? 2. All right. So AH motivations 2. Cool. So now. Okay.
Doesn't this tell you how important it is to you?
Oh,
Does that matter? Like, does that? Because it's saying how.
No, I gotcha. I'm with
Okay,
you.
yeah.
It's not ideal,
Right.
yeah.
but I wouldn't say it's not important I mean, at some point, like, you know the dude, so it's important. Like, we're making an assumption there
Yeah.
that you're not going to say it's important if you don't know the dude.
Yeah.
So we're doing a little bit, but at the very least, that gives us some sense.
Mhm.
So we said that there were 12 male students or something like
Yeah,
that,
12.
right? So I'm going to compute a new variable, and I'm going to call it male student. And everybody gets the value of 0. However, if student equals 1 and gender equals 1, 1 is male. Did we say that for gender?
Yes. Or is gender is male 0? I think we did 1 too.
I think we did 1 too as well. Let's just double check. Gender 1 is male.
Mhm.
Gender, again, that's why I like to use like just female as the variable, so you can 1 0 and then know that easy. But it's just a preference or PP, I don't know. So then male student equals 1, free male student. We should see, I think it's like 12 or 13. Oh, it was education. Yep, thanks. Uh, 24 male students.
So then half said they did go. They have been to Adam Hanna, I guess.
Okay. So what was the question about you've been to an Adam show?
Oh, it's fine. Education.
Has it ever been?
Um,
Ever been to Adam Hanna?
ever been, yeah.
There we go. So male students, we have 11 yeses. 11 male students have been to an Adam show. 13 male students have not. Of the female students, or sorry, nope, that's not female students. That's people who are either females or males who are not students. Like, that's the exclusive categories there.
Okay.
You're a male student or you're not. That doesn't mean you're a female student, although you could be.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't mean you're a male non-student, although you could be. You could be a female non-student. But we just know there's 24 male students and 11 have been to the concert.
There's how many total, sorry?
How many total what?
How many total male students? 24?
24.
So then 13 have not, and then 11 males have. Okay, interesting.
Right. And then we're going to take those people who are manage motivations too. Yeah, we can just do that.
Mm-hmm.
AH patients 2 / This is 11 people
Mm-hmm.
who have been to an Adam show. I personally know Adam. Of the 11 people who have been there, this is our histogram. We're sort of split here,
Okay.
but 6 of those people, of the 11 males who have been to an Adam show, for 6 of them, the motivation was extremely important that they knew Adam. I'm going to say 6 of these people are his boys,
Mm-hmm.
and they go to see Adam because he's their boy.
Mm-hmm.
They like his music too, and I'm not taking that away from anything, because
Right.
like, it's all right to like your boy's music.
Mm-hmm.
But like, this is an understanding that we have about their particular motivations. What could be interesting is to see for those 11 people, now it's again a very small number of people, but if we look at all those motivations to see if, like, of those 11 people, they're going because he's their boy, or if there's other motivations. So then we look across all those motivations. What do you know? I mean, I like Adam's music, so yeah, a lot of those people do like his music. Of those 11, 5, it's extremely important that I like it. But we do have 2 people who said it's not important that I like his music.
And we could maybe infer that those are the people that go for Spencer.
Go for Spencer, I don't know. But like, I don't like his music, but I like him, so I go.
Mm-hmm.
I don't like his music, but I like Spencer, so I go. We don't know who the opening act was for the last time those people went to the concert, but and we're talking about 11 people here. This is a very thin slice. I'd be very hesitant to.
Probably shouldn't comment on that.
Yeah,
Okay.
the most I would do would be able to say, you know, we suspect that maybe some part of a gender difference on people who went to their shows and their motivations might have something to do with knowing him. Wait, where did this conversation start?
We're trying to figure out of those guys that
No, it's like 2 steps before that. Why do we care about whether or not those guys know
We'll
Adam?
travel further.
Travel
Mhm.
further, right? So we're trying to figure out whether there's a gender difference in how far you're willing to travel. Since there were only 12 people who were in that male group, we wanted to know a little bit more about them. Were they his friends? Were they people who really liked his music? We start to see that of those 11 people, more than half of them said it was extremely important because I know him. It's a small sample, but that's pretty important.
yeah, that makes sense. We could like say that that's some of our analysis, but that's also like at the same time a limitation just because of the small sample size.
There you go. This is going to be 11 people willing to travel to age concert 1. Screw it, let's take both of them. No, that's not easy. All right. Are you ready to get down this rabbit hole / can of worms?
Might as well try.
We're about at that. Yeah, we're about at that 2-hour mark where all of your brains are buzzing, right? Right. So, do you remember this two-tailed discussion?
Mhm.
The big takeaway from the two-tail discussion was a two-tail hypothesis is exploratory, a one-tail hypothesis is quote-unquote confirmatory. And we were able to cut this p-value of 0.055 in half by going from a two-tail test to a one-tail test. Okay? I just looked at only those 11 people and how far they were willing to travel. And correlated that with their motivation based on I know Adam. The lower the number for the motivation, the higher the number for minutes to travel. The lower the number for motivation means I'm more motivated by this factor. Only looking at those 11 people, small sample size, huge limitation. The correlation between he's my boy and I'm willing to travel is 0.5. Moderate correlation.
Mm-hmm.
The p-value is 0.12 for a two-tailed test.
0.12?
0.12,
Okay.
which is not less than 0.05 for a two-tailed test. But are we doing an exploratory or a confirmatory hypothesis here? We think that his boys are willing to travel. So presumably, we could do the same thing to this p-value and say if we were doing a confirmatory hypothesis. Go on.
Then it is significant because it would be less than around 0.05.
So it's marginally significant for a directional hypothesis. This is a huge stretch,
Yeah.
a huge slice. It's really, I think, or a tiny slice, a huge stretch from a tiny slice. I think it's interesting because it contributes to the idea that your boys are willing to travel. And I say boys because they're males. However, does this provide him a business recommendation? No. So it's a cute little thing that's
Boys support him. We can let him know.
yeah. He's got 11 boys and they're willing to travel. But it doesn't really provide a recommendation. However, like in terms of being able to provide some like real meaningful, it may sort of be obvious, but kind of nice to have confirmation. Like that's a pretty solid finding.
Yeah.
This thing where we started like an hour ago, of like, you know, your opening acts need to be local and you should probably keep your opening acts
Yeah.
until the end.
Yeah.
Mhm.
It's like our big thing.
Yeah.
Cool. It's very helpful.
I'm still kind of a little confused as to like how you know what test to use. Like whether it's like a t-test or a correlation or a histogram.
Okay. A histogram is not a test.
Well,
It's a graphical
Frequency.
illustration. Frequency just lets me look at a single variable. Okay. So one of the things that I like to do when I look at histograms is it just gives me a sense of how the group I'm looking at responds to a particular variable. Okay. We can look at the entire sample, or we can look at subgroups. So you can look at histograms of variables for any slice of your sample or the total sample. But a histogram is just a visual representation of means, or not just means, but frequencies. And the frequencies can be used to calculate the mean. I look at this histogram here, and it tells me the mean right here. I know that the mean of this variable for this group with this size is 2.36. I can do means for any of those variables we did t-tests on. So I say back here, important elements, all of these things, important elements, features. I can say, give me the frequencies for those things. And give me a histogram. Now I'm just going to look at these frequency tables. I can look at these histograms, and this is my total sample of 148 people. And the only thing I'm doing here is just looking at how did people respond. I can use their responses in those frequency tables to generate means. I could, if I want to, specify only a certain group. I could say, only give me students and then generate a histogram, or only give me adults and generate a histogram. At this point, I'm still finding graphical ways to illustrate these values. And that's all I'm doing with histograms, is graphical illustrations of these values. But then if I have two groups, PC students and adults, males and females, you name it, two groups, that's when I start to get into a t-test, which is I want to compare the mean, which is a summary of this question. I want to compare the summary of this question across two groups, which is what's the mean for this group? What's the mean for the other group? And if those two groups are different, the t-test will tell me. The t-test is what's used to compare the means of two groups. Okay. That was what you were looking for, I think.
Yeah, and correlation. Like what is like the difference between?
Can I ask you like a clarifying question that might answer that? So would independent sample t-tests be groups against variables, and correlations would be variables against variables.
The way you're saying variable is you're talking about something continuous,
Yeah.
like one of these things, or how much money, or how much time. We're talking about an interval or ratio level measurement. Some of these we've used ordinal, but as long as it's on like a scale, I tend to think more rather than nominal, ordinal, interval, ratio. I think categorical versus continuous.
Okay.
Because when did you leave the concert? It's definitely ordinal, but ordinal in a way that it's continuous.
Okay.
Wait, Liz, what did you say the independent t-test? So it was correlations or variables against variables.
Continuous, or scale.
Yeah, categorical.
Oh, for independent t-test is going to be categorical versus continuous.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Actually.
Now, did we in here? Sakai, where are you? It's either in this one or the other one. PowerPoint so important is going to take over. No, it's not there. Is it this one? Oh, no. Where are you? I know I put it together. What module was it in? There we go. That's the one I want. This. This was in analysis procedures.
Mm-hmm.
T-test, ANOVA, and ANOVA. So groups and categories with a continuous TV. So this is, I've got two groups or one group, which is two categories, males, females, students, adults. If you have three or more categories, PC students, students not from PC, adults, you would need to do an ANOVA. If I've only got adults versus PC, which is two categories, but again, that's your independent variable. We were saying, groups,
Yeah.
right?
Mm-hmm. The categories is like, okay.
Yeah. So if you've got a categorical IV,
And the independent variable, you said?
Yep. Categorical independent variable, and your dependent variable, you were talking about variables, but I want to clarify your language as a continuous variable, something on a scale. That's what we're after there.
So like say, for example, sorry if you don't want to go back to that page. Say, for example, we were to try to look into PC students, non-PC students, but still students and adults,
Yep.
you would use an ANOVA.
Right.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah, because this
Since we got rid of that, we're not even going to use any ANOVAs.
Right.
Okay, that makes so much more sense.
Right. So here, this is, we can say a t-test is a mean difference, the difference between this group and this group. That's one difference. Group versus group creates one subtraction. If we had group A, group B, group C, we'd have this subtraction, and then this subtraction. We'd have a lot of different subtractions. The t-test doesn't accommodate that. The analysis of variance, the ANOVA, does that sort of.
But you can do an ANOVA with two categories.
You could.
And what? But we won't. We didn't do any of those.
You don't need to.
Okay, cool.
No.
Okay, cool.
Are you gonna, is this finding gonna be the narrative, the stem that you build your presentation around?
Probably.
I mean, I honestly, I think that's, for him, that's such a huge thing. Like, I really think that's a nice little, like, because, all right, so then it gets to the storytelling piece. And I say this for any level industry, like, you sort of get like maybe 7 minutes of your manager's time and then 7 seconds of his manager's or her manager's time. From time to time. And it's just totally not real numbers or anything, but just as like you go up the ladder, you get less and less time. So it's like, how can you find one thing that they hear, that they believe, and that they remember? And if it's like, you show me all these charts, I don't know what to do. If you remember one thing, your residual message, it's local acts should be opening acts and keep them around to the end. Bring them on stage to do Sweet Caroline, to do Shook Me All Night Long. What's that Journey song? Don't Stop Believin'. Like, find a crowd favorite to throw in at the end that everybody knows. Wagon Wheel, I don't know. Just keep them around until the end. And then your crowd won't go away, and it'll be a more fun show for everybody. But the opening act has to be local, because if you don't bring the local act, like you bring your
his own, like,
right.
Yeah, this is really helpful. This is very interesting.
God, that's actually like kind of meaty. I bet people know that, but I don't.
It's cool that it was like tested.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
That's very interesting.
Like, all this other stuff is kind of cool and exploratory, but that's a story.
Yeah, you can actually like put it into context for him.
Right. All right, team.
Awesome. Thank you so
And
much.
12:26. So yeah, this will give me enough time to I think I got a test or a thing. I don't know what's on the calendar. Yeah, all this that you need is yours. Let me
Frame them literally.
let's do. We'll take pictures of them and throw them up into Slack.
Yeah, I'll do that.
You don't lose that stuff. All right. Let me shut down, save.
Can you send us those?
Yeah, so I'm just going to take all of these documents that we've been working on, and then I'm going to copy them back into the meeting invite. So if you go into the meeting invite, you should be able to find these files.
Okay.
Awesome.
Sounds great. And did you get my test form for tomorrow's exam?
Yeah, I gotta send that off to OES. That's on
I'm
the.
doing it at the same time, so at 11:30.
So I gotta get that out tonight.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's in the queue.
Okay.
Jeffy doesn't sleep a lot this week. But this is. I bumped into. You guys know Joe Gemma? He's a management professor. He's a junior class dean. He's just all around class act, 100%. Like, I bumped into him this morning, and I just told him the same thing. But it's like, all of this for moments like being able to say you have a real, like, that's a real finding. Like, these moments are worth it. Like,
That's very cool.
This is awesome. So thanks, team, for doing a great job. I'll see you tomorrow for the exam. I'll see you Friday for the presentation. Maybe we'll be here, or I'll try to book a room. But right now we're scheduled for here.
In this room.
Yeah, and I think Adam actually has a 2:30 marathon on Friday. I feel weird knowing that I think I know that, but at this point, right on. Yeah, see you guys. All right, girls. See you, friends.